If you've been watching the show for a few years now, you probably know that we think that cookies are the most high-risk type of baking you can do in the kitchen. We call them little cakes.
That's right.
That's what Fannie Farmer used to call them. The problem is that you have very short baking time, very high heat, relatively speaking, and then tiny changes in ingredients, baking soda, baking powder, type of flour, amount of sugar, kind of chocolate, makes a huge difference in results. And today, we're at the top of the most dangerous baking pyramid. We're doing chocolate crinkle cookies, because you have to get the crinkles just right, too. So I think you have sort of a house of horrors here in terms of all the things that could possibly go wrong.
All right, so let me show you our rogues gallery of cookies here. Now, these look great, right?
They
on
do,
the outside.
actually, yeah.
This is a pretty typical chocolate crinkle cookie. Now, chocolate crinkle cookies have tons of sugar in it and often a lot of high-fat chocolate that's melted in. So as a result, you get cookies that are just too wet on the inside. They actually smush. It's almost as if they're not baked all the way through. All right, so.
Wait, can I put that aside so I can eat that?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm going to shove those in my pockets here in a second. But the problem is it's just too wet. We want to be able to eat a few cookies, not just one, okay? So it's just too much. Now, that extra moisture that's inside the cookie dough causes problems on the outside, too. This is a pretty typical you go and you roll the balls of dough into confectioner sugar. Well, the confectioner sugar disappears because all of that moisture is absorbed. It goes away. These little than chocolate crinkles. Now, I mentioned before there's tons of sugar in this, and this is what happens when you leave that huge amount of sugar in. You get some sort of strange Tim Burton looking kind of cookie here. I mean, these just are not good, and they're actually quite crisp, and that's that extra sugar in there.
Okay.
Finally, this is what happens when you use the most traditional mixing method, which is creaming. You cream sugar and butter together. You end up with these really cakey cookies that are quite tough and quite dry inside. So the first thing that we're going to eliminate is the mixer method. We're not going to cream butter or sugar together, and that's because we don't want those domed dry cookies. So it's a make by hand cookie dough, very easy. And we're going to introduce a lot of chocolate flavor at every step, but we don't want to rely just on bar chocolate because we saw that's one of the things that makes the cookies too fudgy. What we have here is a cup of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to mix in a half a cup of Dutch processed cocoa. So this is a dry chocolate. It's not going to add more moisture to the cookie. And it's got a ton of flavor. So we can also control the sweetness. It's unsweetened. Now we have a half a teaspoon of salt to balance the flavors. And then we're using two kinds of leaveners. Now we're starting off with a teaspoon of baking powder. And on its own, baking powder can give kind of a domed appearance. So adding more baking powder to the mix, we didn't want to do that. So instead, what we're going to use is a quarter teaspoon of baking soda in addition to that baking powder. This is actually going to create almost an over-leavened cookie. It's going to balloon in the oven and then collapse. And this is one of the things that's going to make all those great crinkles. All right, whisk this together. All right, so you can see that huge amount of cocoa in there. We're off to a good start. Now on to our next chocolate. So any kind of sweetened chocolate was just overkill. We used unsweetened chocolate. So we have the Dutch processed cocoa in the dry. We have unsweetened chocolate in our mix. And this is 4 ounces of unsweetened chocolate. We've melted it with 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter in the microwave, 50% power until it was good and melted all the way through. And that took about 2 to 3 minutes. Let me put this aside. We can mix together the rest of our wet ingredients. Now that is a lot of sugar.
Wait a minute, I thought you started this segment by saying too much sugar makes a fudgy cookie, and we didn't want that.
A lot of sugar with sweetened chocolate was really the problem. You're getting sugar on top of sugar. So both of our chocolates are completely unsweetened. We're able to control the amount of sugar that goes into the cookie. So this is 1.5 cups, and instead of granulated sugar, we've got light brown sugar here. Now that's going to add more depth of flavor, and it's not going to taste so one-dimensional. We'll mix in 3 eggs. And then also to kind of boost that chocolate flavor to make this more rich and more adult chocolate friendly, we've got 4 teaspoons of espresso powder. Now, this is optional. I happen to love the flavor of chocolate and espresso together. And this is a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Get out any of those lumps from the brown sugar. All right, pretty darn easy. And now I'll go ahead and add the chocolate right in there. Oh, you know this cookie's gonna be so good. Our last step, if you wouldn't mind, just pouring the dry ingredients right into the chocolate. Thank you, and I'm going to use my spatula to fold it in. And we don't want any streaks of the flour or cocoa to remain. All right, now it's starting to come together. There we go. All right, so Chris, we do not want to start shaping the cookies now. The batter's just a little too loose. It's not going to hold its shape. And this is pretty typical with chocolate crinkle cookie recipes. They'll call for refrigerating the dough to let it firm up, at least for 4 hours, maybe even overnight. But we actually found that was a problem. 10 minutes on the counter is the perfect temperature to let these set up. And that's because we don't want the batter to get too cold. All right, Chris, you can see it's been 10 minutes and the dough has solidified. It's actually quite thick. So it is time for us to take this, roll it into balls, and then roll it into powdered sugar. At least that's what's traditionally done. But you saw that even with the moisture in the dough, it can start to absorb too much of that powdered sugar, and you end up, it's like, where's Waldo? Where did the sugar go? So what we found was a two-step approach worked better. We're going to take balls of dough, roll it in granulated sugar first, and then into the powdered sugar. Let me show you one here. I highly recommend to anybody out there that makes a lot of cookies or muffins, anything like that, you invest in a few portion scoops. This is called a number 30 because that's the amount of ice cream scoops that they get per quart. So 30.
Didn't know that.
30 scoops per quart, that's right. So this is equivalent to about 2 tablespoons. We're gonna just drop this right into the granulated sugar and then into the powdered sugar. And we really wanna get quite a bit of powdered sugar on this, and this goes onto the sheet. All right, so I'm going to continue to do 10 more. We're going to get 11 per sheet so that we can space them apart. Now, what the granulated sugar is doing is it's creating this kind of shell, this coating that's on the outside of the cookie. So it's going to create this hard shell, and the powdered sugar won't be able to be absorbed by the cookie. Yeah, we definitely would not have been able to do this if we had used the dough right away. It was just way too loose.
Well, chocolate also helps because it sets up, it starts to come together.
That's right.
Quickly.
All right, so that is that, 11 per sheet. Now this recipe makes 22, so of course we're going to bake these in 2 batches. But this first sheet is going to go into a 325-degree oven for about 12 minutes, and I'll rotate the pan halfway. And what I'm looking for is the edges to be kind of set, but we want that center to still be nice and moist. When those come out of the oven, I'm going to go ahead and shape the remaining 11. Again, roll them into balls, the 2 sugars, granulated, and then 10x or confectioner's sugar, and bake them exactly the same way.
You know, the science of these cookies is actually a little bit complicated like all cookies, but this is particularly difficult. There are 2 things we're trying to do. First of all, before the cookies stop spreading, we need to dry out the top crust. Think about 2 continents pulling apart billions of years ago. If you have a really brittle crust, they'll pull apart, you get crinkles. If it's soft and elastic, they won't. Baking soda does 2 things. It slows down the spreading, which is good. It also makes the top crust porous, which means it dries out more quickly. So that's good. But the bigger trick was using granulated sugar to roll the cookies in. Here's what that does. It's hygroscopic. It draws in moisture from the surface of the cookie, and some of that sugar will melt into that liquid, and you get a sugar syrup. A little time goes by in that hot oven, and some of that liquid evaporates. You get recrystallization, and that traps even more moisture from the surface, which gives you a dry surface, and then as the cookie spreads, you get cracks in the crinkle cookie. So